Tiffany, come on up.
Can you guys hear me okay? Thank you. Thank you so
Yes.
much for having me.
Sure.
Awesome.
So, Tiffany has a story that I think probably men are going to be attracted to, the vulnerability, and women are going to be attracted to the strength. So I think that being said, what was the most profound thing about your story, do you think? And you can kind of briefly share what the story is, and then we'll kind of move into some of the. I'll ask you some questions about it, but then we'll talk about some of the things the profound things that came out of it. So why don't you give us a little summation of your story?
Well, I guess if you're asking, just the most profound part of my story was that when I married my husband, I had these expectations. I wanted to buy a house and have kids and have stability, and it all had to happen now. And it wasn't. And he wasn't the person that I thought he was. Go figure. And so I sought out to change him. I did all these things that I was gonna fix him because that's what you're supposed to do. My mom was a single mom. She wore the pants, and men were supposed to be trained. And so I was gonna go train my husband, and he was not trainable. So I ended up on this long journey trying to fix him, and in the process I actually changed myself. And by the time we celebrated our third wedding anniversary, we had spent 2 of those years separated, and we had a baby on the way. So I thought it was time for us to maybe be together. And we're actually next week going to be celebrating our 8th wedding anniversary.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you.
So what was the turning point? I mean, here you married him, obviously thinking there's going to be one thing. Turns out to be a little bit differently than you anticipated. But you see, at some point you started to change you. Yeah. You changed you. What was that turning point?
Well, there were a lot of turning points. I mean, it's not just a magical, this is what happens, people, and we're just going to fix it. We sought marriage counseling. We attended some 12-step programs to help with some of the addictions and some of the craziness in our lives. And in the process, I had to learn how to get out of God's way because I was trying to control things that I couldn't control.
How many of you guys identify with that? From time to time, that we just want to do it our way?
Yeah. And so that was probably one of the bigger points, was like getting out of God's way. But in marriage counseling, my counselor kept telling me, Tiffany, you're asking things of your husband that only God can give to you. Like, he's a person, he's a man. He can't give you these things that you're asking for.
Like what were some of those?
In my story, I kind of share that I feel I'm learning now that the expectations I had, the race to his finish line, if you will, was like a labyrinth with constantly changing things. It's like he would meet an expectation and then I would change it. And I think that I really realized it last year. It took a long time when I sat down and we had more stability than we'd ever had. We had more money than we'd ever had. Not that we're rich, but we had 2 beautiful, healthy kids, and I was still angry, and I was still resentful, and I was still consumed with so many things that I didn't want to be consumed with. And so
even so many things had gone right,
yes,
you were still...
He was doing everything right, and I was still not happy. And so I was blown away, because as I was writing the conclusion of my story, I went back to a journal that I was writing in last year, and I wrote a prayer down, which I never write prayers down, but I wrote a prayer down saying, take my heart and just get rid of all these feelings. I don't want to feel anger. I don't want to be this person that I am. And that's when the transformation really sincerely took place.
So, I mean, it's one of those things where there's a lot of times we're angry or frustrated or overwhelmed or stressed out about them that are legitimate. They're legitimately a concern. So, I mean, you mentioned addictions, and I don't know the story, and so I'll ask, and you can choose to answer however you want to answer. Was it an addiction that maybe both of you had, or one person and the other was dealing with the consequences of that?
He has the addiction to something, and I had the addiction to him.
Okay. Codependency.
Yeah, basically.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. So, and the reason I want to share that is because a lot of times we think it's one person's fault. when there's a whole thing that goes underneath the current. I mean, a lot of times when somebody comes to me with addictions and things like that, there's so many other things that are at play than just the person's addiction, that if we just focus on the addiction, we'll end up right back to where we were to begin with. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that you acknowledge that there was, this other thing that was also a situation as well. So when you identified these things, I mean, I think the hardest thing is when we get to a point when we have a legitimate frustration, to let go of that legitimate frustration and say, okay, I'm going to let go of that and I'm going to work just on me. I get a lot of relationship people that want to come to me for counseling or coaching, and I always tell them I'm not a relationship coach. My practice is not to keep you together. Mm-hmm. My practice is to make you both individually the best people you can possibly be. And if that means you guys stay together, great. But if it means you guys break apart, I'm perfectly fine with that. My focus is to help you become the best you, and you become the best you, and then we just sort it out and see what happens.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's like, if you have a legitimate reason to be angry with him, how did you let go of that when you knew that whatever was causing it, there was some substance to what you were complaining about?
I think the hardest part was that I was going to the wrong places at first. I was talking to friends. I was going to his sister, and that's not fair to him or her. But when we went to the counselor, I'm trying to point the finger. I mean, I went and he was going down. Yeah. I was gonna tell her everything. I had a list. This is everything he's doing wrong. And it didn't take long for her to turn it around on me and say, Tiffany, look at yourself. Is this, you're being abusive. You're verbally abusing your husband. And she had a lot of nerve.
Wow. Yeah. How dare she? Who does she think she's talking to?
That's the problem.
Yeah. So the resentment list went on to her. But it took a long time for me to see what she was talking about in that. We had gone to counseling before our first anniversary. We were on the rocks, and not too long after our anniversary, we actually separated. So, can you repeat the question?
Can you play the tape back?
Yeah.
I have no idea. Well, I think it boiled down to how did you let go of what he was doing wrong? Because maybe it was legitimate that he was doing it wrong and he shouldn't have been doing that or whatever, and it was affecting you. But how did you let go of what he was doing wrong and say, okay, I just need to work on me?
I think during our period of separation, I had time to kind of do that, where I just got to learn how to enjoy my own company. Because in marriage, it can be lonely. I had this expectation that we were going to do things together and it's going to be so much fun. And now he's telling me I'm not going to go to that. And I'm like, what are you talking about? So I had to really learn how to, when I was sitting in my little 345 square foot studio, I had to sit and learn how to enjoy my own company and figure out what I wanted to do and what I like to do, because I kind of lost sight of that. I was so focused on him that I forgot who I was and who I wanted to be.
Does he still do some things that bug you?
Of course.
So how do you deal with it now?
Part of my story is learning how to respect and learning how to express to him in a respectful manner and choose your battles. I mean, how important is it? Is it going to matter 10 years from now that he wants to do that? We have kids now, so it's kind of a fun little dynamic of, you're playing too many games. You're sleeping too long. But I have to find a way to respectfully tell him or not. And
so how do you do that? How do you respectfully tell somebody not do something when they're a grown adult and they get to make the choices of what they're going to do? How do you respectfully do that?
That's a very good question. That is a very good question.
Because I want to know.
Well,
Can you talk to my wife?
to respectfully, like I said, you have to choose your battles. How important is it? Am I really going to have to say that? Am I going to wake up tomorrow and regret telling him that he shouldn't be doing that? He's a grown man. He pays the bills, But I think the key is to talk when you're not in the heat of the moment, when you're not angry. And when you are angry, do the dishes or do something productive. And then revisit it if you're still angry an hour or a day later.
So what if he doesn't change that, though? I mean, like, he still wants to play games, so he's going to play games and he's, ignoring something else or ignoring what you think he should be doing.
There comes a point where you just have to accept it. You just have to accept that this is who he is. I can either stay or I could go, basically.
Okay. So what, if he were to sit here with us and I said, okay, she's not going to say a thing. You get to say whatever it is on your version of what happened. How would his version be any different than yours?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I practice those.
To be honest, he read my story, so I have full permission to publish the story.
Good.
And there was only one thing in there that he had to add. And it was about a fight that we had before we got married. And it was New Year's Eve, and I wasn't having it. He didn't even invite me out. Like, he just wanted to go out with the boys. It was like our first New Year's Eve. Mm-hmm. And so we both drank too much. I actually was kind of physically abusive to him. I was kicking him from behind, thinking he's not going to remember this tomorrow. And he says that I slapped him across the face. I don't remember that part. But after that, he actually kicked me. But then he blacked out and didn't remember any of it. So he woke up the next day and he called his friend and he's like, what happened? And his friend told him that he kicked me in the stomach. So I let him think that that's what happened. He just, didn't get provoked. He just kicked me. He drinks too much and he just has a problem that needs to get fixed. Wow. And so
I appreciate you sharing that. I mean, and being vulnerable because we make mistakes. We screw up.
Yeah. I let him believe that he wasn't provoked for, probably like 6 years.
Wow.
And then one day we were driving around with friends, he's like, that's what happened? And we're still married.
So, did it ever bother you during that 6 years that you were letting him feel guilty about something?
Honestly, no. I thought that I had no faults.
Yeah.
Like it was all him, and I was perfect, practically perfect in every way.
Wow, thank you for saying that. It's not easy to sometimes admit things how we're not what we maybe would like to be at all times, and we're not how people perceive us to be. So from the outside looking in, you could probably make the argument that people would probably justifiably think it's all on him. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the things that when people only know one side of the story, it's really easy to get them to believe whatever you want to tell them. It's when they get to hear both sides that all of a sudden some of the stuff comes to light. And I think that's why one of the important things with Cindy and I when we broke up was that we both went onto Facebook and said the same thing at the same moment when we put it out there. And it wasn't because we wanted to, beat anything or circumvent anything, but we just really wanted people to know that it wasn't anything that anyone did wrong. It was just about a decision that we made. And really, she made the decision. So she's the one that broke up, truth be known. So, but at the same time, we made a decision on how we're going to approach this, how we're going to share this. And I think that it would have been easy for her to just say, yeah, we broke up, and then people go, well, that Bob, he's a really jerk. And she's like, she could have done a lot of things to get people to side. And I could have had a lot of people side with me. And I think the greatest thing that we did was we didn't look to have anyone, Joe, we get it, right? You know the truth, right, Joe?
I'm with you, Bob.
But the thing is, I think that the important thing is when you can share both sides and still have people love you through it. And so what was the support that you had? Because, coming to the realization that, okay, it's not all him, and coming to the realization that, wow, I do have a part in this and I'm kind of doing some bad things too. Obviously you had a counselor, but how did you get support during that time? You got this counselor beating you over the head on something and you're going, wait, I thought we came because of him, not me. Yeah. And then you're all of a sudden you're on the spotlight. How did you work through that?
It wasn't until I started going to a program where people kind of weren't judging. I could share my story and not have to worry about my image because, I'm perfect. And they were able to kind of help me work through some of those things too, especially when it comes to just working through what you're angry about and like what part you had in that, whether it's with your husband or with a friend or anyone.
So what were you angry with? What did you come to walk away from going, I wasn't really just angry about this behavior, I was angry about what?
Ooh, that's a good question.
I practice.
At the end of the day, I think I was angry because things weren't going my way. They weren't going the way that I had planned. I had this vision. We're supposed to own a house and we have financial stability and we're supposed to have 2 kids by now,
right.
And it's not happening. And just the frustration. And the thing that it wasn't even that, it was just the frustration of it's not going to even happen anytime soon, like based on where we're at today. I just couldn't see it happening like ever. Like,
so it wasn't that you just didn't have it right then. That was frustrating enough.
yeah.
But that the proximity of it happening anytime in the near future was not good.
Yes.
Okay, the probability of it. Okay. So so what did you do? How did you deal with that?
I had to learn how to feel. Like I had to learn how to what is it that I'm feeling right now? What do I want? And why am I feeling this way? Like I said, after about a year, we separated. And the things that I was pointing fingers at, I couldn't point fingers at anymore because it was just me.
We're together, right?
Yeah. So I want to make sure I answer your question. Do you need to play the tape back?
Yeah. No, just how did you deal with that? I mean, I get that, you started feeling certain things and it wasn't going the right way and it didn't look like it was ever going to happen, and so you got this separation, you got all these things, but how did you, I get that you spent some time alone and accepted part of your responsibility in that, but at the same time, isn't it like it's still one of those things where you still can point at the other person saying that he's still doing it wrong?
You can still point at the other person, but I had to get coping skills. Like I had to learn how to cope with what I was feeling, and I also had to learn how to live in the meantime. Like I had to say, you know what, I've always wanted to run a marathon. Let's sign up for a marathon. I've always wanted to have a dog. Let's get a dog. I've wanted to do this and no one's holding me back from it. Let's do it. Yeah. And I got to fall in love with myself as well. And in the process, I also got to fall in love with my husband again too.
Okay, there's a whole nother topic. When you've had anger, bitterness, frustration, resentment, overwhelm, all of that, and I mean, and I've dealt with a lot of people like this that they just go, I can't love him anymore. I mean, I don't respect him, I don't appreciate him, I don't value him. I just can't love him anymore. Mm-hmm. How do you do that? How do you fall back in love with somebody who's still not behaving exactly the way you want him to? You still have all these unfulfilled expectations, and most of you guys have heard me say unfulfilled expectations lead to anger, bitterness, resentment, and frustration. Mm-hmm. And so you have all these unfulfilled expectations that are still not being met, mm-hmm. and yet you're supposed to still fall back in love with them. How do you do that?
Well, I think it wasn't only me in that circumstance. Like I saw him making the effort. I saw him doing the things that he should be doing. And like I mentioned earlier, he got to a point where he had met all my expectations and I was still angry. Mm-hmm. So I had to realize that was coming from me. Like that wasn't anything that he was triggering. Right. It was something in me that was toxic and not fun. And I'm sure he didn't like being around that either. Yeah. So, and we had already had 2 kids at the time. So I'm like, I don't want to be this angry mom. Right. So, yeah.
What do you think is the foundation for what you've been able to get over that, but also to start building upon something else? What's been your foundation?
The foundation to kind of move forward from here. One of my big turning points that I haven't mentioned yet was that after we had our second son, I had this epiphany of, oh my gosh, one day they're going to have a woman in their life. And God forbid she treats them the way that I've been treating my husband.
Wow. Did you ever play that tape? Did you ever play the tape and go, what would that be like? How would I as a parent respond if I saw a woman treating my son the same way I treat my husband?
I don't even want to go there.
Yeah. It's scary, isn't it?
It is.
I would throttle that person,
Yeah.
And then we go, but if we feel that angry towards them, why aren't we feeling that towards ourselves?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's brutal.
And plus, I think it's also, you talk about, I know they always say a daughter needs to be treated well by the father because the man is, that she chooses, but it's the same thing. And I don't think it ever gets said between a mother and a son or a husband and a wife, but it's the same thing. And I want to focus on the way that I treat my husband because I want my kids to choose a woman that respects them.
Right. I have a lot of times when I'm working with somebody, I'll bring up that very point. I'll say, imagine 20 years from now, your son has grown up, and your son has a woman that is abusive to him, or just nagging and constantly angry towards him and bitter towards him. And your son says, I don't know what to do. And you say, well, you need to lay down some boundaries, and you need to set some rules, and you need to stand up for yourself, and you need to this. And if he turns to you and says, but Mom, I'm only doing what you taught me. And that was to accept it and to make that acceptable that she treat me that way, because you treated Dad that way, and you let me know very well that was acceptable behavior.
Right.
What would we as a parent then do if we were faced with that? Wow, what they're doing is actually modeling what we've done. So yeah, huge statement. I think I'm going to ask one more question, then I'm going to let other people kind of weigh in. I think the question for you is, what are 3 things that you think have been the greatest learnings for you in this whole situation? I mean, maybe you had a great learning early on, and then maybe you had a great learning in the middle, and maybe something you just shared one of the most recent ones. So what have been like the 3 top things that this life experience has taught you?
I think, again, the first one is not trying to control everything. I grew up with, my mom is very meticulous, she has control over everything, and it's a blessing and a curse all at the same time. So I had to learn how to not be as controlling, and having kids will do that to you too. You only have so much control. But like I mentioned earlier, just kind of getting out of God's way and letting whatever consequences happen, whether it affects me or him. I just had to kind of sit back and say, I made the choice to marry him. I can either stay or go, but there's going to be, I don't want to say a consequence, but just a natural progression, and get out of God's way. Let God do his job. So that was the first.
So isn't that tough, though? I mean, I have a hard time. I get the whole thing, let go, let God. I get the whole thing of, just to be patient. And that just doesn't work for me most of the time. So, I get the concept. How do you do that, though? How do you go, I'm just going to let go and let God. I'm just going to let God deal with this, and I'm going to get out of the way. Give me some actionable things that you can do to make that happen.
Actionable things, these are what worked for me. And I'm not going to say they work for everyone because I know that every circumstance is different. But one of the first things I had to do was separate myself. And say, I don't want to be in this situation. I want to be healthy. We did separate to reconcile. I didn't file divorce papers or anything. So it was just kind of to remove myself from the situation and let whatever happens happen.
Okay.
So that was probably the easiest way for me to kind of let go and let God. Because before I was there and I was you're not waking up early enough. You're, it was I was a nagging wife and I didn't like myself and I didn't like him. And so that was kind of a way for me to take a little bit of power but give it away at the same time.
Good. All right. So who has a question? Yeah, Bill.
So it's interesting that you had the journey that you were who you were at one point, and then you kind of took responsibility. Do you remember the moment when you even opened the door that it might be your issue, or when you even kind of played with that thought at the moment?
It was a progression, but I would have to say last year was, as I was writing in my journal, saying he's met all my expectations. He's done everything I wanted him to do. He had this list of, what did I call it in my story? Mandatory requirements before I take you back. He met 99.9% of those, and I still was feeling the anger and the bitterness and the resentment. And even though my counselor had tried to drill it into me, it's still, that was my moment when I just said, I don't want to feel this way anymore. My husband's done everything right and I still feel this way, take it away. And that was probably the moment.
Well, yeah, Jim.
Did you ever give or explore the opportunity of a alcoholic type, what do you call it, intervention?
We did not do an intervention. But when we had been dating and he kicked me unprovoked, he did go to some meetings, and he decided that he could do it on his own, and we can only do that for so long. So, yeah.
You danced around it a little bit, but you didn't really talk about it. Said you were raised by a single mom. Did you have a relationship with your father?
I was going to cover that. I do. My parents had 50-50 custody, but I do have daddy issues. So I'm sure that has a big part to play in my marriage as well.
Great question, great acknowledgement. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah.
Yes.
The unmet expectations, how were they communicated in the beginning?
Or were they?
Yeah,
right?
were they?
Or were they even
I mean, when I look and you go, everything was, this isn't happening fast enough, this isn't this. Was he aware that there was this whole list that was on
Oh
the
yeah,
wall
it
that
was
had
like
to go
nag, nag. I remember one night we had dinner with a couple who, was successful. They owned their home in Irvine and had 2 good jobs, and I felt really bad. I don't even know if I said anything at that point, but I think I had abused him enough to the point where when we got home, he was crying. He's like, I know that's what you want, and I can't give it to you, and I'm sorry. And yeah, I'm gonna cry telling that part.
And when was that?
That was early on in our
That
marriage.
was
So it
early
was like
on.
within
So
the first.
then so you still had a lot of struggle, even though you recognized that was, it wasn't he was withholding it saying, I don't want to give it to you. It was that for some reason he didn't feel like he was able, right? And you were still insistent on.
I was like, you should feel bad.
Yeah. Okay. How many do we do that though? How many times do we beat somebody up when we know that it's not necessarily they're trying to withhold it from us, and they're not trying to be mean, but we still want them to feel like shit about it, and so we're going to do everything we can to make sure that they feel that, even though we know they're not doing it intentionally.
I know some people do that about God.
Yes, absolutely, they do. Or we do. Absolutely.
And you mentioned God, so I'm really curious, and I'm a believer.
Yes.
Was that part of your foundation from the start, or was that something that evolved as you started going through problems?
I grew up in a Christian home. I went to church camp, was taught that if I don't believe, I'll go to hell. So I have the foundation. But it wasn't until like my period of separation where I really, really took it to God and was like, I don't know what to do anymore. Like physically hitting my knees and saying, take it, I don't know what to do.
Anybody else? Any other question? Yeah.
Did you ever trace it back to where your expectations were set from?
Ooh, that's a very good question.
That's a good question.
Ooh, that's a really good one.
I practice as well.
Where they came
Get back to the
from.
pirate question. Let's get good on this one.
To answer your question, we worked on it a lot in counseling. A lot of it was basically at the end of the day, when I did a lot of the exercises with my counselor and with my husband, my counselor basically said, Tiffany, you have never had your expectations met by any man, your dad, your husband, like these are only things that God can do for you. And so I don't.
Social media.
Oh yeah, that's a big one, social media. That was a big part of it too. In my marriage early on, Facebook was huge. And so here I am feeling alone, and all these people are posting giant engagement rings and awesome honeymoons and babies and houses and everything that I wanted and wasn't getting. So that was a big part of it too. But backtracking, I don't know where it stemmed from early on.
It's interesting you brought that up because when I was in 8th grade, I never had a dad, didn't know my dad, and but there was this guy that I was named after, and he kind of surfaced right about that time for about 6 months, and he had been in prison and all this other stuff, and he had just gotten out, and I remember he was just a complete jerk to my mom, and I remember thinking, man, I don't even want a dad. If that's what a dad is, I don't even want that. And he was only around, like I said, 6 months. That's probably all I remember of my entire life with him. So it wasn't that big of an impact, except for the fact I remember what I didn't want. And I remember my older brother saying to me, I said, but man, that's a terrible excuse for a dad. And I remember my brother saying, he's not the example of what a father should be. God is. And then he gave me several scriptures to look up and kind of, showed me this is what a father does. This is how a father really behaves towards his children. And I remember thinking, I don't need a dad. I don't really need one. I've got the perfect father, the perfect example of what a father should be. In heaven, I don't need a dad. And so I remember growing up, that was like eighth grade, and I remember getting into high school and some of my friends going, don't you miss having a dad? And I'm like, I don't really know what I'd be missing. Yeah, your dad takes you, to the baseball game, I guess, but I can go to the baseball game with myself, or I'd go with you and your dad, and I did that a lot, So I always felt like there were other people that could cover that spot, but nobody could cover that perfect emulation of what a father should be. And so I remember when I clung onto that. I just gripped onto that, and it sounds like you did too.
Well, at first I'm like, no, that's not right.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, that's exactly it.
Yeah. Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah, Rashid.
So, after mentioning that you had father issues, did really working with your husband to evolve your relationship, did it help you deal with some issues that you had buried from your father, or was that before or after that you really succeeded in marriage?
One of the cool things that happened after we had our first son, some of the resentments that I had for my dad kind of resurfaced, but I had a whole new level of love for my dad because I loved my grandma, his mom, and she had just passed away. And so for Mother's Day, it was like my first Mother's Day, and it was my dad's first Mother's Day without his mom. I was really emotional, and I wanted my grandma, to be there, obviously. And I knew my dad was missing her. So I bought a book, that Love You Forever, read it. And I wrote a note in it. It was kind of just something that was on my heart. And I said, I know that you want your mom to be here, and I know that you want to buy her flowers and, love her for Mother's Day, but just know as a mom now that the pleasure was all hers, being your mom. And it was kind of freeing. Like, that was like kind of our miracle moment in our relationship, where I was able to go, okay, like, he's God's son, he's my grandma's son, like, and kind of let go of some of the past resentments. Obviously, some things still surface because we're human, but I'm a grown up now, and I can work through those.
Anybody else? So I want you to give us like your best secret.
Ooh.
The best thing you found out. Yeah. I want you to tell us the best secret about Janae. No. But I want you to tell us like the greatest thing, that the biggest awakening for you that you want everyone here to know. So like something that you've put in the book that you say, I know that everyone needs to know this. What's that one thing?
Ooh, that one thing. I think I've shared a lot of it. Let's see. I think one of the funny bits in my story, and I don't know if I've shared it tonight yet or not, but when you're in the throes of it, especially in the beginning, and you're feeling all those feelings, I felt, and when I went to my counselor, I wanted her to know this circumstance is very unique. Nobody ever experiences this. Nobody ever has trials like this.
Yeah.
I am the only woman who is dissatisfied with her husband right now. And it's a simple secret. I'm not. I'm not the only woman, and we're not the only couple who's had marital challenges. And if you're willing to work through it, you can.
Wow.
And you will.
Yeah. Good for you. Thank you for sharing all that.
Thank you.
Thank you for being real and telling us, some of the things that you realized about yourself. Because it's really easy to just kind of gloss over some of the stuff that we're responsible for. So thank you for sharing that.
Thanks for
And the book is
having
coming
me.
out when? It's coming out?
Go ahead, Tiffany.
The book is coming out September 18th.
September 18th. And what's the name of the book?
It's called Victory, Stories from the Winner Circle.
And how many different women? 8?
There's 10? We keep losing track. I know we have 10 fingers, but I think there's about 10 awesome stories.
Okay, so 10 different stories from 10 different women, right? Where's it? How are you going to launch it?
Amazon.
You're launching it on,
Yes.
on Amazon. Okay. So what we want to do is make sure that you get posted in the Facebook group. You're a part of the Facebook group, so you'll be part of the Facebook group now.
Awesome.
So make sure that you post it in there so that we can actually participate in that and take advantage of that as well.
Thank you.
So awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.